All right, how you doing?
Good.
Okay, so we're going to pick up on the conversation we were having in our podcast three on anxiety. Which again, this will be podcast number four, I think. And just to set the context for everybody, again, we're not going to go into great detail, but we're building a framework for life so that we can live the life that God would want us to live, the life that we would have always wanted if we could possibly understand and appreciate all the things God really does want for us, which is far bigger than our own desires for ourselves. And like you and I talked about before, Jake, just like much work and effort goes into building a building, we need to put that same kind of effort into building our lives and with the same intentionality and helping other people do the same thing. And also, like we talked about with a building such as the Empire State Building that we have on this display, it starts with an idea. It is unseen before it's seen. And it much the same way in our lives, the quality and content of our life will come from what's inside of us. And the most important thing about what is inside of us is our connection to the invisible reality, which is more real than our visible reality. And that invisible reality, of course, like you and I will talk about through all these podcasts, is our connection with God Himself. And so that'll be foundational to the things we talk about. And like you and I talked about before, what you and I believe to be true about God is the most important thing about us. It's the thing, it's the belief that will determine um, our perspective on everything else. It's the foundational belief to all our other beliefs. It is the place from which we will make our most important life decisions. And it's the belief that we will use to interpret everything around us so that we can make decisions. And so it starts again with what we are building inside. Before we build our lives, we build ourselves first. And then um, that brings out the tangible realities that we contribute to the world as individuals.
So,
You agree with all that?
yeah, so the last where we left off, we left with Jesus calming the storm.
Yeah.
I guess how did they feel? What did they believe about God or Christ? Because I can't think of a more anxiety-inducing experience than being in a middle of a boat in a storm. That's a parallel, like a couple others that we talked about. That parallel it's a very good one for talking about the kind of anxiety that I go through. I have to ask myself, what do I believe about God, and do I have the kind of faith in God that He'll calm the storms that I'm going through? There's a couple other good parallels that we talked about. Like I think we talked about the giants in the Promised Land, and I like all of these different analogies for anxiety. Uh, storms and giants, and we talked about some of that. So hopefully we'll,
Yeah. Yeah, we're going
yeah,
to dig back in. We'll review that because you're right. The topic is anxiety because you and I both think that this is an important topic for everybody today. The idea that we're going to bring across is that what God would desire for our lives is to have lives full of love, joy, and peace. That's God's desire for us. And that there are things in our lives that rob us of the love, joy,
mhm.
and peace that God would have for us. And again, we listed a bunch of these different things that we will talk about over time. And like you said, we're going to talk about anxiety. And to kind of set the stage for that conversation, you've already revealed some important truth in what you just said that we're going to expand upon related to that topic. And to draw that out, we talked about Jesus, a story in the book of Matthew, which is the first book of the New Testament about the life of Jesus, where Jesus is with his disciples and he calms a storm while they're on a boat uh, in the Sea of Galilee. And so, to set that context again, for those who may not remember or didn't listen to the last podcast, Jesus has chosen his disciples and he's with his disciples and they are going to cross the Sea of Galilee on this boat. Remember, some of his disciples are fishermen, so they're very comfortable in the water normally.
Hmm.
But they're going to cross the Sea of Galilee, and they're going to go to this area known as the Decapolis, which I think in the Greek means 10 cities. And what's unique about the Decapolis, among many things, it's full of a bunch of people who do not believe. They're not. They don't come from the Jewish background. They don't believe in Jesus, and um, they're not godly people. And the disciples certainly know that. And if you may recall, if you have the Bible background, this is the place where uh, Jesus encounters a man full of a legion of demons.
Hmm.
And he casts them out and drives them into a herd of pigs. It would be understandable that they'd have a lot of pigs there, in part because many people on that side worshipped Baal, a fake god, a pagan god, who, among some of the things that people believed he could do, they believed he controlled basically nature. He had control over nature. For example, water. And pigs were used in sacrifices to Baal. So it wouldn't be unexpected for them to have herds of pigs there, which the Jews considered an unclean animal. Um, but if you can kind of get in the mind a little bit of the disciples when they get into this boat, Jesus is taking them to a dark country, a country where they worship um, these pagan gods who and claim that these gods have control over nature. So you can imagine what might have been going into their minds when they encountered a very big storm on the way over to this place that they probably didn't want to go to. Um, to deal with people that were not great people in their eyes. And it's also interesting, by the way, that Jesus specifically wanted to go to those people. But in the midst of all that, they're probably wary about going there in the first place. And they get into this big storm. And again, these are fishermen. So the way they respond to this storm should be interesting because they've been through storms before. Okay. So there's a couple places in the Bible where this story is recounted. And we'll start with this one. And just for everybody's benefit, Jake, would you mind just reading these verses that are on the screen right now? Because I also got feedback that sometimes people are driving. They may be commuting to work and they may have a little trouble reading what we put up on display. So
Sure.
we certainly don't want anybody getting in an accident as we try to talk with
Yeah.
them about this topic. But you can maybe read these things to them.
So it's Matthew 8:23 through 27. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him, and behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. But he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, Save us, Lord, we are perishing. And he said to them, Why are you afraid, O you of little faith? Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, What sort of man is this, that even winds and sea obey him?
Okay, great. Now, before we dig into that a little bit, I just want to point out that Mark reports just a little something different in his um, recounting of this incident. I want to pause just for a second for those who may not be very familiar with the Bible or may question the validity of the Bible, which we do not, just truth and advertising right up front. But you will find when you read the four Gospels, the four different accounts of the life of Jesus, that there are many things that are a little bit different. Um, that is actually, to me, really positive evidence of the validity of the Bible, because whenever you get four people in a room and they tell the exact same story about something that happened, what does that usually imply?
That it's true.
Well, it usually implies to me it's not true. Let's say I'm a police
Oh,
officer,
I
right?
see. I see
And
what
I
you're
say,
saying.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, like these four people are accused
Yeah.
of a crime. I bring them in. So, okay, what happened?
It's a
They
little
all say the exact same thing,
like word for word.
word for
Yeah,
word.
I gotcha.
Um, because you know as well as I do, if you and I are in any situation and we both observe the exact same situation, we're going to
Yeah.
observe it a little bit differently,
Hmm.
and that's to be expected. Now, if I were
Everybody's got a different perception of reality slightly, and
Well, that doesn't mean that they're wrong either,
yeah.
because you and I will observe from different angles,
Hmm.
in different directions, and different things are more interesting to us. And each of these individuals are going to bring in a little bit of perspective because they're
Yeah.
seeing it from a different position.
Hmm.
Um, and you will find if you take the time to carefully read through the scripture and read the Bible and the different accounts of people, you will find not only do the accounts all align. In other words, there's really no discrepancies that matter. What's different is more context.
Hmm.
Um, so in this case, there's some important context, I think, here in this situation that Mark points out, and I've underlined it here. So if I go back just real quick to Matthew, they said to Jesus, who was asleep in the boat in the middle of this huge storm, they said, "Save us, O Lord, we are perishing." But Mark also points out that they say what here underlined?
Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?
Yeah. Don't you care?
Yeah, it's a little different.
It's very much different. I
Yeah.
agree. It's kind of like accusatory, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
like, I mean, and sometimes, um, from a human perspective, when you see somebody who doesn't get excited about a situation, it can appear that they don't care.
Hmm.
That being calm is a signal of lack of concern or lack of,
Right.
you know, they don't care. From a perspective of our relationship with God, it can feel the same way sometimes when we are in a panic over a situation and don't see a mighty move from God. You know, we can't perceive this mighty move from God. We may be inclined to ask ourselves, God, don't you care? I'm in a storm. Don't you care? Have you ever felt that way?
Yeah. Every time I feel that way, I feel like I'm being blasphemous. So I try not to ever let myself think that way.
Hmm.
Because what I've come to find is that if I'm in a bad situation, it's more than likely my own doing, and it's something that I caused with decisions that I made myself. So I try not to be accusatory towards God the way that verse kind of reads.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to. You can't really help it sometimes when something really bad happens. Like if if something that you care about, or like an innocent person or thing that you care about gets hurt or dies, I think it can be easy to ask yourself or ask God why did you allow this?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think it's way more complicated than we think most of the time. Like, oh, how could God allow whatever starving children in whatever country? It's more complicated than you think, and you're to be accusatory towards God is very small-minded because it's
Well,
way more complicated than you think.
it's also understandable, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And but so it's interesting. Sometimes people, if they believe in God,
Hmm.
which is an important if, the most important actually, but they will often assume the worst of him.
Yeah,
They will either assume he doesn't care, um, or maybe he's just indifferent, or he doesn't care, he or he's got some kind of bad intent.
hmm,
He's just a mean God, or he's punishing me. There's lots of things people say, and I've talked to people who say they're angry at God
yeah,
because of what's happening in their lives. And so this is a reality. I think it's also worth pointing out to people, though, that it doesn't do us any good to deny those feelings when we have them.
hmm,
In fact, what we should do is actually bring them to God in prayer.
yeah,
And that's an honest prayer to God. And you're right. It's not what we should feel, but that's something that we have to trust God with too. And what God calls us to do, tells us to do, is talk to Him about it. And how do we talk to God about these feelings? We pray to God. But we will talk about that in the future too, because we want to stick on anxiety here.
Hmm.
But so you can see the response. So there's one set of facts, and if I can just go back to one of our previous podcasts, remember we talked about SMEAC?
Hmm.
That whenever there's a situation, whenever something needs to get done, the first thing we need to understand is our situation. So what's going on, and then we need to put, and we have to understand what it is we need to do, and then we need to come up with a plan that's going to work. And we talked about the fact that the situation is something um, that is a reality. We have
Yeah.
to face that reality, and we have to face uh, our responsibility to use our response ability to do something that's going to be effective. And whether you're a leader leading other people or you're just trying to live your life, a big part of your success depends on being able to bring out the best outcomes from any situation or any relationship, most of which you do not pick. Most people do not pick their situations and they don't pick their relationships. Now, you pick some of your relationships, but we have relationships all day long that we don't pick. And our goal is to bring out the best, regardless of the current state of things. Okay. And that's where we get to have an influence. But getting back to this point, then, what is the external situation that both Jesus and the disciples are facing here? What are the facts?
They are caught in the storm.
Yes. That's a
And
fact, right? Is it true for the disciples that they're caught in a really big storm?
yes,
Is it true for Jesus?
yes.
So it's the same facts for all involved.
Hmm.
Yes. And the boat was being swamped
Right.
by the waves. It appears like this is going to sink. Um, so what is the state of mind of the disciples versus the state of mind of Jesus?
They both are understanding of the situation, but the disciples are not understanding of the power of God. They're worried about themselves because they're not considering what God's capable of. So they're worried about getting killed by the storm, and Jesus is not, because Jesus understands that he's, God's in control.
Yeah. What was the predominant thing that was causing the disciples to absolutely panic was the visible reality
Hmm.
that they were experiencing. And what they were missing was the most important invisible reality of what they were experiencing. This is the fundamental place where most people are suffering in their lives is we've been conditioned our whole lives. We've been taught in our schools everywhere that the only thing that really matters is the tangible. The only thing that is provable is what can be demonstrated by experimentation. People will argue that that what is up against faith, for example, is science. You hear this all the time. This was a big mantra for years. I believe in science.
Hmm.
Okay, as if somebody of faith does not believe in science, which is a fallacy.
Hmm.
But this is what people communicate. Um, but what we are communicating here is that the most important thing about this situation was the invisible thing, was the thing that you can't specifically see. Um, and this is why Jesus says, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" Now,
Yeah.
faith, again, a lot of people, when you say faith, they think of blind faith. Have you ever heard that term,
Hmm.
blind faith?
Hmm.
What does that mean to you, blind faith?
It means that you trust in something when there's really no reason to trust in it.
Yeah, it's just faith in nothing,
Yeah.
right? It's just like boy, I sure hope that team wins or whatever.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's, it's just, it's
It's like
based on nothing,
luck, like
like luck.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, and then there's, whole schools of self-help, you know, teachers who will kind of tell you that you just have to believe in yourself,
Hmm.
believe in yourself and that'll get you through. How good it would be believing in yourself. How valuable would that be in a storm the size of this one?
Yeah,
Uh,
not very valuable.
not very good at all.
Yeah.
And this is a place where um, people, the disciples, have come up to the end of themselves. They have come to a place where they realize there is no hope in me. I'm a fisherman. I
Hmm.
know the storms. I see what I am powerless against this storm. And so Jesus, who is restful, he's at peace in this storm. He's resting. He says, "Oh, you little faith." And he's not saying, "Oh, just believe in nothing." He's saying, what he's saying by faith is, "Oh, you who aren't taking in consideration the bigger reality of what is not visible to your eyeballs." Okay. The most important reality. And it's from the context of that invisible reality. Jesus was able to sleep in the boat and get up confidently and then also have a real impact because what faith is not hope in nothing. Faith is what is your connection to the reality of the invisible, the same invisible that created all things.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
yeah, go
also
ahead.
it's also just the context here is God in context. This situation to God is
Hmm.
nothing. God, who's like the cosmic ruler of all of reality, um, you're in a boat in a storm, and that's the situation you're worried about. To God, that's like, yeah, that's nothing.
Yeah, you're right. And so if you want to, somebody once said that understanding is the basis for cure, which means if you want to heal something or fix something, the f- the fundamental thing you have to have is an understanding of what it is, right? If you have a sickness, I can't cure you unless I understand you and the sickness
Hmm.
so that I can apply the right cure. You have to understand correctly in order to respond correctly. That should be obvious, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And so these fishermen understood the water. What they lacked in understanding was the most important factor in the outcome of this situation was God Himself. And so now, like we talked about in the past, I kind of came up in the aviation community. I was a air crew for many, many years. And I had mentioned in the past that, we study aircraft mishaps in the aviation community in order to prevent future mishaps. And if there is a mishap, you do an investigation to find out what happened so you can avoid doing it again. I had mentioned that the number one causal factor for mishaps is human error, aircrew error. But when you look at when you investigate a mishap, there are contributing factors and there are causal factors. Contributing factors are things that contributed to the problem. Causal factors are what actually caused the mishap. So to give you an example there, um, if an engine goes out on an airplane, the airplane is still flyable. And if the aircrew do the right things, then they can land the airplane. So it's happened more than once, but an engine goes out on an airplane, aircrew do the wrong thing, and the airplane crashes. What was the contributing factor?
The contributing factor was the engine going out, and the causal factor was the aircrew doing the wrong thing.
Correct. Um, the engine going out didn't have to be the catastrophe.
Yeah, that didn't like seal the deal. It was their
Yeah,
actions that sealed the deal.
but it contributed, right? Contributed
Yeah.
to the problem.
It would.
Okay,
I mean,
caused
yeah, because it would. None of this would have happened had that engine not
correct.
gone out. But
Yeah. So in this case, what these disciples can see is a contributing factor. There is a big storm, but they're missing the causal factor, God Himself.
mhm.
Okay. They're missing the most important thing.
Yeah, it's such a good way of putting it. Because it's not going to happen unless God decides that it's going to happen.
He at least allowed it.
Nothing can
Um,
be caused. God causes basically, or yeah, he at least allowed it.
he allows it to occur, right?
Yeah.
So there's things that God doesn't desire to happen that
Hmm.
happen, but He allows it to happen.
Yeah.
And again, some heads might be exploding right now as they listen to this, but we will talk about it
Yeah.
more. But I just want to set the stage here because what's really key here, if you want to respond to this correctly, this situation, then you have to understand the most important thing about the situation. And what you believe to be true about the most important thing that is taking place in this situation will determine how you respond to every other thing. So the disciples' view of God Himself and their relationship with God and what they believed to be true about God shaped the way they responded to the situation, as it did Jesus. And their responses were completely different. So, what do you think the disciples thought about their God at this moment when they said, "We are perishing"? What are they assuming about God?
They would have to at least subconsciously assume that he's not in control of the situation.
They might. They might assume that He's not in control.
Because sometimes I subconsciously doubt God without realizing it. Because if I stop and think about it, I would know, yeah, if God's in control of this situation I'm going through right now. But sometimes if I'm not thinking about it, my subconscious mind will allow me to doubt and have completely zero faith that God's going to take care of what I'm going through. If I'm not focused on God being in control, I'll have fear and I'll have anxiety because subconsciously I'm rejecting God, or I'm not having faith in God to handle the situation.
Were these disciples believers?
Yes.
Yes. Did they believe the right things about God in this moment?
Not in this moment.
No, they're believers. They're
Yeah.
not perfect believers, right?
Yeah.
But what they believe to be true is going to determine how they respond to the situation.
Hmm.
Same with Jesus. What He believes to be true determines how He responds to this situation. Same situation, two different responses. And what determined the responses was their ultimate belief about God Himself. And their response was, "We are perishing." Now, we're on dangerous ground here a little bit because we're trying to guess what was in their minds. And I will tell you right up front that the Bible warns that no one can know the thoughts of another person. In fact, the Bible says no one can know the thoughts of God unless God reveals them to us. The good news is, part of the good news, is that God actually does reveal much of what He is thinking to us, which, again, we can talk about in the future. But the point here is that, like you said, maybe they thought, we don't know, but maybe they thought that God wasn't in control. Maybe they thought they had made a mistake and God was punishing them. Maybe they thought that God wanted them to perish. Does God ever let people that He loves deeply die?
Yeah.
And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing if it's something that God allowed. Ultimately.
Do we ultimately believe what Paul said in Romans here, this 8:28 and 29, that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose? And then it continues to say, because He foreknew and predestined that His people would be conformed to the image of His Son. Do you really believe, even to the point of your perishing, that what God is doing is what's best for you? And in this particular case, the most important thing to these disciples at the moment was their physical lives, and what they believed was they were going to lose them. They had made an assumption. They had assumed that they were going to perish. And what Jesus is essentially saying is, you do not have a grip on reality. You do not. You are panicking because you don't have a grip on reality. And what reality is he talking about? The reality of God, who he is, what his intent is, what his motive is, and their relationship with him, and what his intent was for them. Um, and and that he, the perfect creator of all things, who was in charge and sovereign over all things, loved them and had a perfect plan for them and was in complete control of the situation. That's the critical fact, the critical reality that they could not see in the moment, because all they could see was what they saw in their eyes. And this was the foundation of their panic. And it's also the foundation of so much anxiety in life. There's a lot of things that you and I have already said about anxiety. We have described it as a false reality that we imagine in our minds about a future outcome that we don't want to have happen. So we've talked about this. You and I, last time, I think we talked about the fact that, so many people are struggling with anxiety. And what that is they imagine future scenarios that they don't want to occur.
Yeah.
And their imaginations get away from them essentially and start to control their lives. It starts to control them physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And it causes them to either fight, flee, or freeze. Do nothing. And so what they do is they either worry about things that they can't control, which is pointless.
Yeah.
Or they worry about things they can control instead of doing something about it, which is stupid.
It starts as a survival mechanism that's ingrained in you to imagine what could be and try to formulate a contingency plan, like I talked about before. And then when you allow that to run amok and allow that to take control over your mind and your emotions. And what I often have to remind myself is, if I'm worried about a situation or like a potential future situation, if I ask myself, is this something that I have any direct control over? Like, is this within my control to change this situation? Or, and if the answer is no, it can be really hard, but I try to convince myself to stop thinking about it. It can be really hard. So a good example is if you're at the you're on your way to the airport, you're about to miss your flight, you're getting there as quickly as you can. You don't know if you're going to get there in time, but you're doing everything you can to get there as quickly as possible. The only part of that situation that's in your control is really like you're driving and like how quickly can you get there. And but ultimately the situation is not in your control. Like whether you miss the flight or not, it's not really in your control. So in a situation like that, I would try to talk myself down and convince myself not to stop freaking out and stressing out. And then once you can accept,
what causes it to get out of control? You're right. It makes sense for you. I mean, we do this in the military. I mean, the whole point of training for combat in the military is to prepare for potential conflicts that haven't happened yet. It may never happen, actually. But readiness, which comes from training, is about preparing for the possible futures that exist out there, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense. It makes sense to have contingency funds in the bank. It makes sense to think ahead about possible outcomes in this so that you can avoid them. But what causes this thinking about possible outcomes that you don't want to occur, what causes that to get out of control to the point where it becomes debilitating? What do you think?
So I think in nature it would be if you're like a smaller animal, like there's a like let's say you're a rabbit and there's like a wolf or like a fox and it wants to eat
Hmm.
you. It's the fear that makes you run away.
Well, can I stop you there for a
Yeah,
second?
yeah, absolutely.
I don't think foxes have anxiety. I think foxes have fear.
Yeah,
You see, fear is when the fox sees a bigger animal
or the
and
rabbit.
or the rabbit or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah, I guess you used a rabbit scenario, but
yeah.
um, see, fear. You and I talked about this last time too. Fear is not necessarily a bad thing. See, fear is a response to a clear, present danger that, and it's your body signaling you to take action. And when you have fear for a real threat, um, you're going to give a survival response. But what anxiety is the same emotional, it's same physical and emotional feelings to an imagined scenario, to something that is a possible future, probably an unlikely future, but
Yeah.
you feel the same as you do in fear, but it's unreasonable. In other words, you said it last time. You said fear is a problem when it surpasses reason. You use words like that a couple of podcasts ago, and that's exactly right. It becomes your fake future becomes a reality to you in your mind.
Yeah.
And so, just to your point, I mean, I kind of interrupted you there. I want you to finish your thought, but just to make it clear, it's different. This is when we're not actually now. In this case, you could say, "Hey, look, the disciples had legitimate fear in the sense that the boat was no kidding being swamped, but they were misinterpreting the scenario. This
Yeah.
would be more akin to the fox seeing the rabbit and being fearful
Yeah.
because the what was more powerful? What was the most powerful force in this scenario right now? The storm or Jesus in the boat?
What would make me have anxiety in the flight situation where I'm missing my flight?
Yes.
What if I'm right that I'm going to miss the flight? What if I do
Right?
actually miss the flight
Yes.
and I don't get home for Christmas dinner and then I'm in a planes,
Mhm.
trains, and automobiles situation?
It's going to make
The
a great movie.
It's going to make a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
The outcome is what I'm worried about. And
Sure.
what if the outcome does happen where I miss the flight and I miss Christmas dinner and all this? I don't get home to my family. I think that we need to reassess the way we perceive how we're going to react to those circumstances. So I think that ultimate when you're going through that situation where you've missed your flight and this horrible thing, it's probably not going to actually be as bad as you thought. It's probably not. You're not going to be as crushed. Your fear of that situation happening is ultimately, I think it's going to be a worse feeling than how you're actually going to feel in the moment. In the moment, when you're dealing with like rescheduling your flight and like calling your family, telling them you know you're not gonna make it, and then when you're actually missing those events that you were trying to get to, you're not going to actually be as upset and depressed as you thought you would be when you're thinking about it.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. So look, you're really hitting on an important point here,
Yeah.
Jake, and I'm glad you brought it up intuitively as we were talking about this.
Yeah.
A couple things there. One of the reasons that people have anxiety, one of the reasons why the disciples were kind of freaking out here is because one of the things as we imagine these scenarios and possible outcomes, we think that the outcome depends on our response. In other words, we think that we have to fix or be in control of this problem. We think we have to do something or this problem is going to destroy us, whatever it is. That's one thing. We think that we have to control the situation. Why does that cause anxiety? Because most of the time we don't think we can control the situation. And oftentimes we'll face problems where it doesn't seem to be an outcome that is possibly favorable.
So you're putting the burden of responsibility on yourself to control a situation that
Everything
you don't believe you can control.
that you can't control. You already
That
said it.
that
You
is a
said that
combination for complete ruin.
correct, but that's what anxiety is, right? So
Yeah.
anxiety is assuming I have to fix this myself, right?
Yeah.
There's another part of this that you
A
mentioned.
situation that you know you can't fix. You're telling
It's a
yourself you have to
situation where
fix.
the outcome depends solely on me.
Yeah.
And the other thing about this anxiety is the the thought that the outcome, if I don't get it right, is going to be bad.
Yeah. If
Um,
I fail, then everything's ruined.
Everything's ruined. We
Yeah.
make it so we make more of the situation.
Something
We
you
make
will fail
more.
at. So it's
We
like you're guaranteed to fail. You're telling yourself, if I fail, I'm ruined, and it's like something you
yeah.
know you're gonna fail at.
We put too much of the burden on
Mm.
ourselves, and we put too much expectation on the outcome. And so what there and again, this gets back to what you really believe to be ultimately true about you in your relationship with your environment, the primary thing about your environment being God himself who created that environment. So it gets back to what do you really believe to be true about God and you? Um, and the situation, the scenario, whatever's happening in your external environment is actually probably the least important part of the
Mhm.
equation. The most important part of the equation is what is true between you and God right now. And that is the part that science, at least the way we define science right now, is not going to answer the most important question for you is this faith issue of what is true about God and his relationship with you, and how does that apply to everything you're going to experience on this earth? And that what drives a appropriate or inappropriate response to every situation. And I think one of the primary reasons anxiety is out of control today is because increasingly people are um, missing their vital connection with God Himself and misinterpreting the most important fact about life is what God wants for them in their lives, what God has in store for them, and what God has planned for them. And so your scenario about the airport's a good one because I got to fly tomorrow.
I like
And
to use little
yeah,
life examples like that to
yeah,
illustrate a bigger point because it's something that like everybody listening has gone through or will go through.
yes.
It's the same thing if you're driving somewhere and you're going to be late. Like, these situations are good. Like, is microcosm the right word? Like a micro example. That's probably not the right
Yeah,
word.
well, I mean, it's kind of an analogy, maybe.
Yeah, an analogy.
I mean, this is why the Bible, by the way, tells you these stories, like the one we're reading.
Exactly.
This, this,
It's like my own version of a parable. Yeah.
correct. This really happened, this story on the water, and it's a real life scenario. Because guess what? God deals in the real life. Okay. It's not just philosophy here. This is really God working in the lives of his people to have specific outcomes that he desires for his purposes in his way. I want to just tell you right now, too, maybe this will stick in your head as we talk about these things. When something that happens to you as a Christian, it's not just happening to you, it's happening for you. Okay, God is not just, you're not just a victim, a hapless victim to out of control circumstances. That if that God specifically is doing things in your life on purpose in every situation you're going through. And what he intends to do in any situation is maybe about five things. And there may be more, and maybe people that are viewing might have some other thoughts to this, but these are things I've observed in my life over time that I think God is always doing in a situation. One, he is revealing himself to me in a greater way. He wants me in my situations to see something about him that I didn't know about him before. The other thing he wants to do in any situation is he wants to reveal something to me about myself
Hmm.
that I hadn't seen or paid attention to before. He's going to expose some things in me that need growing.
Yeah.
Now he already knows those things. I'm the one that doesn't know it. And so sometimes he has to put me in situations so I can see my limits
Yeah.
and I can see the things I need to work on.
I,
Go ahead.
I want to make a point to that. So,
Yeah.
okay, let's say you're an alcoholic and you drink every day,
Yeah.
and you don't have the willpower to convince yourself to make the decision to stop.
Hmm.
What's it going to take to get you to
To
stop?
get your attention.
Yeah, to get your attention.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be something really, really terrifying. It's
Correct.
probably going to be pancreas failure or liver
Something.
failure.
Something you don't want.
It's something you really don't want to go
Yes.
through that's going to be extremely painful.
Right.
And if you're smart, if you're wise, the second the doctor tells you that your pancreas is failing and you're going to get diabetes, or you're going to, your liver's failing and you're going to die if you don't stop, you're going to stop more than likely, hopefully, and completely change your life. And you're going to completely turn your life around. So you went through something extraordinarily terrifying and painful, only to become a better person and stop doing that unhealthy thing. And it's really what it took. You probably would not have changed otherwise.
And tragically, some people still don't. And this is the whole point. I mean, this is a big part of what Jesus talks about when he talks about salvation, is accepting God and what he's trying to reveal to you and returning to a right relationship with him. Because there are people who have smoked their whole lives, who will get emphysema. They may have kids. They know they're going to be without a parent if they don't stop. They may suffer and they will never quit, right? Um, and and that is a tragedy, right? And so you're right though, is God is wants to reveal himself to you in a greater way in every circumstance you experience. He wants to reveal these things to you to grow you. He also wants to use your relationship with him to reveal truth to other people, because uh, when you go through a circumstance, everybody around you is watching you go through it, and how you respond to truth, the capital T, truth, God, will be evident to people. And you have an opportunity here to reveal this truth of God to other people and how you respond to your circumstance. So that's three things.
Yeah.
Another thing that he's always doing, I think, is preparing you for more. Because before you can handle big problems, you have to learn to handle small problems that at the time seemed big. When I look back at my huge problems in my younger years, they're nothing
Yeah.
compared to now. But I had to go through them, and I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't go through them. And then finally, and it may not be finally, I might add to this list, but another thing I think he's always doing is well, he's also using you in a tangible way for the benefit of others. So when I face a crisis, sometimes I'm facing a crisis because I need to help somebody else,
Yeah.
and I don't want the crisis, but somebody needs some help.
So,
It's like going to combat, But go ahead.
yeah, I think some of the painful things I've gone through were preparing me for something worse, and that's a little bit
You
of a
know
bleak
what?
outlook, but
Well, let me help you with that bleak outlook,
yeah.
right? Because every time these worst things you're talking about usually have a bigger blessing attached to them as well. And it's a reality that every time you get a blessing in life, it comes with more challenges.
Yeah.
And the bigger the blessings, the more the challenges. I'll give you an example.
More money, more problems.
More money. Well, yeah, but see, you can take a negative outlook like to that, or you can take a positive
Yeah.
one. Because if when I got my first car, when I first started driving,
Yeah.
it was an expensive car. But it was all I could do to handle that car. If you get a really fancy car, guess what? You get a whole bunch of new problems.
Yeah.
You know, it takes a lot more maintenance, a lot more care. You got to do a lot of things, but aren't you glad you have the car?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like that with everything. And it's like that throughout the entire Bible. You'll find that whenever God blessed his people, he brought them some new challenges. It wasn't to punish them. It wasn't to make little of the blessing. It was to continue to grow them for even greater blessings. When he freed the Israelites from Egypt, they left 400 some odd years of slavery. That's a blessing. But guess what? Hey, welcome to the desert,
Yeah.
and then they had to spend 40 years in a desert. And sometimes they got mad, why can't we be back in Egypt? You want to go
Yeah.
back to slavery,
That
right?
that's because, like we talked about, it's human nature to never be satisfied and always want more. And the only way to really fill that void, that like insatiable thirst, is by having a relationship with Christ. I
Yeah, we,
wanted,
we were designed to constantly receive from the Lord and
yeah,
and only have satisfaction in Him. But you said I wanna, so I
yeah.
think you want to do something.
I wanted to jump, yeah, to the next point. This thing that you hear all the time now on the internet, and it's kind of a joke, is like people say like, "Oh, Jesus, take the wheel" or whatever. It sounds
Hmm.
stupid, but but like whenever we talk about anxiety, I can't help but always think about that verse about Jesus being, his yoke is light and his burden is
Yeah,
easy, and yeah, it's like Jesus take the wheel, right? Like it's like not only is he going to take the full weight of your burden, but he's also going to steer that weight in the direction it needs to go.
yeah,
And I can think of no better relief from anxiety than just washing your hands of a situation entirely. Essentially,
yeah.
just like give it to God and like, you know what, God, you can just handle this. I'm gonna go in whatever direction you pull this yoke, and you can
Yeah.
take the full weight of it. And I mean, at that point, it goes back to what I said about don't worry about something that's not in your control. You can take control of that situation and give it to God and let Him have control of it. And in doing
So
so, you don't have to
here's the
worry
thing.
anymore.
Yeah, and let me just tell you this, Jay. You're right. He already has control.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is the thing. So, I mean, you hit on a really good point, though. A big part of our anxiety is we assume the worst in our situations, and because we don't really assume the best in God,
Hmm.
and we don't trust God ultimately. And even, if you're a Christian, you say, I would trust a God, absolutely. Well, it's revealed in how you respond to your situations. Okay. And so this is Isaiah 2:26, 3 and 4. You keep him or her in perfect peace, whose what
Whose mind is stayed on you
is
because He trusts in
why?
you.
Because he trusts you, trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord God is an everlasting rock. You see, what this comes down to is not believing in yourself, not trusting in yourself, trusting in the creator of all things who loves you so much. He only, as a perfect father, only wants the very best for you. And he can, as the sovereign creator of all things, give you all things and the very best of all things. And has a perfect plan in store for you. And we talked about Romans 8:28 and 29. God says in Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Um, and so it's so critical for us to understand that what we believe to be true about our future shapes our faith is trusting God in the moment, and hope is trusting God with your future. And this hope believes that even in our imperfections, God is still in control. We can't screw it up so much that we fall outside of God's plan for us. If we are seeking to truly follow Him, to let Dad be Dad, and do the best we can, and trust Him with the outcomes.
Hmm.
Because and the best analogy I can give you, Jake, is me trying to be an imperfect dad. You know, there's a lot of things I always want the best for my kids, and sometimes when kids mess it up, I don't just let them
Yeah.
perish, so to speak.
Yeah.
I help them out through that.
And I think your child needs to be willing to be helped. And
Yeah,
I think part of it's kind of like neither comes before the other, but the way that you respond to an anxiety inducing situation is kind of predicated on how you're going to are you going to allow that situation to make you more bitter, or are you going to try to seek the more positive result? So this has to do with faith and having faith in God in any situation. Are you going to let a bad situation push you from God, or are you going to respond positively and make it a learning situation? A
Yeah,
learning,
let's say,
yeah.
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to
Go
interrupt you. Go
ahead.
ahead, Lorne.
Yeah.
Let's just give another example you can relate with, right? As one of my uh, adult children who used to be a child,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
um, when, let's say you broke a lamp in the house,
Hmm.
right? Do I want you to hide from me?
No.
No. Am I going to disown you at that point?
No.
No. Um, do I have some kind of hatred for you?
No.
No. Um, if you decide you broke the lamp, you're so concerned, you're just gonna run away from home.
Yeah.
Is that what I want?
No.
No. Does that help you?
No.
No. Does it make me happy?
No.
No. What do I want to do?
Um, Teach.
Yeah, I want you to not break lamps because
Yeah.
nobody wins there. But I also want you to come to me,
Yeah.
not away from me. And it's the same scenario. You know, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, what was their response?
To hide.
Do you remember? They hid.
Yeah.
And what people do in their lives is they just they move farther away from God, like you said, and that's not what we want to have happen. And it only increases your anxiety, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, you could. I use these like light life examples, but I could go bigger and darker, and it could be like, oh, your child
I
died.
think
Yeah.
people get it.
Yeah.
People get it. You know.
Your baby died. Like, are you gonna let that push you away from? A lot of people would say, yeah, they'd be completely like really
Well,
angry at God, and that would push them away from God, and they would reject God for life. In a situation like that,
well,
and
we
it's
you
hard
know, we're
to.
gonna
It can be really hard to allow a situation like that to bring you to God. I can understand. I mean, I can't relate, but I can understand how hard it would be to
yeah,
come closer to God in a situation like that.
yeah, um, yeah, and I think a key point here, again, is that you first step for us in trying to address this issue that so many people are dealing with is get the main thing right.
Hmm.
Um, and you can see this First Peter 5:6 verse, that we cast all our anxieties on him because what?
He cares for you.
You have to believe that.
Hmm.
He cares for you. Not only does he care for you, but he cares for you as a almighty creator who's sovereign, um, who only wants the very best for you, who loves you so much that he gave his one and only son, that even in your worst state, while you were still a sinner, worst of all sinners, even in that condition, he gave you his son, that you can have eternal life now, not just when you die and go to heaven, but you can experience the fullness of joy in life today.
Hmm.
And that's what he wants. And so, like you said, Jake, if I miss the airplane tomorrow, did I fall outside of God's perfect sovereign plan and love?
No.
Is he, could I believe that he actually allowed that to happen for a better good?
Yeah, totally.
But we always think it's for a worse.
Yeah.
We always think that we're losing something. We always think the worst. We don't believe in our hearts that if this happened, yeah, I might have done something wrong, but God still allowed it. He could have made up for my mistake, but for some reason he didn't want that to happen, or he allowed this to happen so I could learn, grow, the things we talked about. If God is for us, who can be against us?
Hmm.
And just like he said, I mean, if God did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, what does it say there? Down here at the bottom, if God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. What's it say next?
How will he not also? How will he not also with him graciously give us all things?
Yeah, Dad wants you to have it all.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, And when I say he wants to have it all, I'm not talking about all the things you imagine in your imperfect mind right now, like
Yeah.
maybe a mansion,
Yeah.
maybe, but that no, what he wants when he says have it all things that are perfect and
Hmm.
good for you. Um, and this is the critical point that you have to start with is like I mentioned, animals don't have anxiety. They have fear, but they don't have anxiety. They don't sit and worry about possible outcomes in the future and therefore don't go find food and eat. No, they have fear when it's warranted, but they don't have anxiety. Anxiety is unnatural. It's something that you have to learn. And the good news is if we can learn how to be anxious, we can unlearn how to be anxious. And to unlearn how to be anxious, we have to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. We have to learn to see things correctly and think correctly about our situations. And we're going to have to unlearn anxiety. And it won't happen overnight because you developed a habit of anxiety. And you can break that habit though, but it starts with getting your mind right about what's true about God Himself and His relationship with you. And I will end here
Hmm.
to go back to this verse that you and I have read before, um, because it's kind of foundational. I think everybody who's listening to this podcast, including you and I, should have this memorized and should probably say it to ourselves all the time.
Hmm.
Um, what's this first part here? What's that say?
Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. So he said,
Okay.
yeah, so he says the same thing twice
Twice.
to create emphasis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rejoice. So
Yeah.
joy again. And I'm
Yeah.
going to say it again, joy again.
Yeah.
Right. And why would you have so much joy? Why does it tell you why does it tell you to do it? Because it's telling us to remember to do it.
Mhm.
See, God knows that we are stuck in bad thinking. And so he's saying, hey, force yourself to have joy twice and have joy twice again because you got to constantly remind yourself, why would I have joy? The reason I have joy is because the creator of all things loves me this much. I have joy because God is in complete control and he's not going to let anything happen to me
Yeah.
that's not perfect for me. And then you can be reasonable. See, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. You said that anxiety was unreasonable. It is. It's when anxiety, it's when fear overcomes reason. See, the only way you can be reasonable is
Yeah.
when you learn to have joy in the truth that you can't see.
Hmm.
And let that be known to everyone. Because what's the key thing you need to remember in any moment of your life? What does it say?
The Lord is at hand.
The Lord is at hand.
Yeah.
Since the Lord Himself is present with us in hand right now, you don't need to be anxious about anything. It doesn't make any sense. But instead, if you're worried about something, talk to God about it
Hmm.
and ask for Him to protect you with thanksgiving. What are you thankful for? Because you already know His answers are always what's best for you. So tell God what's on your mind and then trust Him to be a perfect dad, to listen to you perfectly and respond perfectly. And then this peace of God, which people can't understand, is going to guard your heart, and your mind. Remember, from your heart and mind is where all your decisions come from. From your heart and mind is where all your creations are going to come from. And then this is so critical for us until we podcast again, Jake. This is what everybody should practice this week. If I can get this thing to highlight correctly. What's that part say right there?
Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things.
Okay. So critical. This is something we can practice all the time. We will change our feelings by changing our thinking, and we will change our thinking by filtering what goes into our minds.
Hmm.
And so, what is it telling you? There's a litmus test, Jake, for the things you should watch on TV.
Yeah.
There's a litmus test for the songs you listen to. There's a filter for the talk that should come out of your mouth. There's a filter for the kind of things you should accept from other people. Um, and this filter is this: stop listening to anything that's not true.
Hmm.
Stop listening to anything that's not honorable. Just get it out of your thoughts. Stop it. Don't turn on the TV and and spend all day listening to the dishonorable.
Yeah.
Stop thinking about the things that are not just.
A lot.
Stop thinking about the things that aren't pure. If it's not pure, get it out of your brain.
Uh,
If it's not lovely, if it's not commendable, if it's not excellent. I mean, we have got to cleanse our minds of these things. And what we need to do is think about what is worthy of praise. Don't talk about what isn't worthy of praise. We all know it's out there. Ignore it. Don't focus on those things. Focus on what is awesome and watch how your attitude changes. You're going to say something.
we it's sort of human nature for us to want to focus on the bad so that we can try to do something about it. But
Yes.
it's like you hear about cops who become addicted to drugs because they're exposed to these drugs when they're trying to, like, stop these drug dealers. When you sometimes there are like certain talk shows I listen to where the host is constantly talking about such negative in the news, like all these negative things, and to the point where I hear this all the time. They'll often say, "I'm starting to get like demoralized and just crushed having to talk about this all the time." They have to
Every
focus.
minute,
Yeah.
yeah, every minute I spend thinking about what's not right is a
Yeah.
minute I'm not thinking about what is right and doing what's right.
Hmm.
I mean, if we pour all our energy, I mean, I'm not saying be blind to injustice. God is a God of justice. God tells us to fight for justice. I get all that. But part of that, the best way to do that is shine, it's like somebody said, I'd rather light a candle than curse the darkness. Look, I don't need anybody to school me today on what's wrong in the world. I got it.
Yeah.
Everybody knows. What I need to show the world is what right looks like. I need to pour my thinking and my energy into what is awesome. I wish there was a movie I could watch on TV that was positively uplifting and encouraging 100%. You can't turn on anything without it being demoralizing
Hmm.
because the world is staring at darkness getting darker every minute. The Bible says here in Proverbs 3, let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Don't turn from your love and faithfulness. Bind it around your neck. Write it as a tablet on your heart. And that's how you find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. This is key. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your understanding, disciples in that boat, us in our storms in life. Trust in the Lord and in all your ways, acknowledge the fact that he is God. He is real. He's in control. Everything we said about him, he loves you perfectly. He's got this. Acknowledge him in your situation, and he's going to make those paths straight. Don't try to be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from everything that's bad, including your bad thinking. And it'll be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord. Okay. And then you're going to have plenty. Your vats are going to be bursting, it says. And you said this, Jake. Don't despise the Lord's discipline or beware of his reproof. Sometimes he's going to let you experience some consequences because he loves you. Why? The Lord reproves him who he loves. And as the Father, the Son, whom he delights. The perfect Father God will let you sometimes experience some of the consequences of your behavior so that you can grow, not
Hmm.
to crush you,
Yeah.
because he wants what's very, very best for you,
And
and
he's
this
not
is
going to
so
give anything
important.
that you can't handle either. That's promised.
He is there for you. It's not happening to you, right? It's happening
For you.
for you.
Hmm. Yeah.
um, and then look, um, keep your heart with all vigilance. Okay. Um, and that goes back to the Philippians verses. Don't let the wrong things go in your heart because whatever's in your heart, everything else from your life comes out of that. The building that you build of your life, like that Empire State Building, is going to come from what's in your heart.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, and so this is the key. And I think we're probably out of time for
Yeah.
this time, but
That's fine.
we'll come back to more of this. But I think the key takeaway from this is if you're dealing with anxiety, uh, you need to consider what you really believe to be true about God and and what is really true about you and your relationship with God. Trust in the Lord with all your heart.
Hmm.
Don't lean on your own understanding. Um, he will not leave you or forsake you. And whatever happens, God goes with you. And he's right there with you the whole time. And he is going to work it out for a good you can't understand. If you just got to trust him. Don't let your mind be swayed by every voice out there that tells you a lie about the truth of God. Lies like he doesn't love you. Lies like he's not real. Lies like he's not in control. Not true. Okay.
Yeah, I can't. I don't think I could have expressed that better. So that was a really good. That was a really good way of summing that up.
Awesome. Well, I think we probably have more to talk about with
Yeah,
anxiety.
yeah.
But
No,
this is maybe the first foundational part of that. We've been
that's
talking about anxiety for a couple of podcasts now because it's important.
that's a good way to cap this episode. But yeah, I don't want to stop talking about anxiety for a while. I think we'll keep talking about it in the next episode.
Sure.
And we'll just keep like I said before, we'll just keep talking about it until we feel like we've exhausted the subject, because I think it's too important to leave any stone unturned. So
Well, just tell people, hey, we're going to talk about anxiety until you stop having it. How's that sound?
yeah, let's just keep talking about it until nobody has it anymore.
Until nobody has it anymore. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you for watching. Please comment. I'd really like to see some comments that we could bring up in the next episode. Any questions you have, any concerns, any suggestions, comment them, and we'll try to listen and respond if we can. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications for when we upload, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks.
See ya.